So I am uh, nobody. I'm just someone pretty young, um, and just doing my own research on a variety of different things. Uh, I've always had an interest in religion, um, and I never grew up religious. Both of my parents were religious at one time in their life, but they kind of grew out of that in a certain sense. I'd say they're both still spiritual, but they don't really subscribe to any particular religion. But both of them were at one point Christian, and I think one of them was Mormon for a very short time. Um, but with that in mind, I was never really taught anything good or bad, true or false. I was never really raised to believe any certain thing, and I was always, it was kind of like find your own answers. We'll answer your questions. We'll whatever. Anyway, so as of recent, I've done my own research on Christianity and the Bible, and I actually read all of it because before you judge it, before you really say anything about it, it's only fair to read the source material. And so when I read the Bible, it was, I read it in context. I have Christian friends. I have people who have the Bible and interpret it. And so, well, a lot of it I read, without context at first, and then when I had questions, I'd ask Christian friends, what do you think this means? But overall, even with that context, it was kind of like very. I don't want to say contradictory, but it was contradictory to itself, especially between the New Testament and the Old Testament, but even more so just events in the nature of God. And so it was very very iffy for me, and so I was like, okay, well, I've read it and I've kind of gotten my taste on what I think of this passage based on even through people defending it, through people criticizing it, and through my own lens after reading the whole thing. And so, it's kind of important to like know what you're reading comes from and the history behind it. And so that's what I've done most recently is I've done a deep dive on the actual history of the Bible and getting perspective from biblical scholars. Theistic ones and non-theistic ones, just people who study the book for a living, because they know what they're talking about. And so I did that and got perspectives from all sorts of scholars by, getting, peer-reviewed journals, peer-reviewed stuff in general, because that's the way to do it instead of getting your stuff from hearsay and just, on all sorts of topics. And so I'm going to kind of break down what I have kind of learned about the history of the Bible. Not talking about its specific contents, but literally just the history of how it was. And understanding that history has made me deeply question its validity in all ways. So, Jesus' death is, around 33 CE, right? And, it kind of gets crazy because the first accounts of Jesus weren't written during his life or even like right after his life. The first accounts of all of his story were written a whole 35 years after he died, which is a really long time. Like, to put that in perspective, like if you tried to bring a court case or an investigation to an event that happened 35 years ago in the United States, like, there's no way you could even get a clear picture of what's going on at all, really. So there's that, and that's just the beginning. So it's important because the actual authors of the New Testament, that being, John, Paul, Mark, Luke, Matthew, almost all of them aren't even like giving first-hand accounts of the events. They're telling stories that have been spread through word of mouth for 35 years based on eyewitness testimony, and they aren't even the eyewitnesses. Most of it, if not all of it, is secondhand. And so most scholars agree, including theistic scholars, that, the names of these, even the names of these people, that we attribute to writing the Gospels, are like, there's a good chance most of them are anonymous. Like, we don't even actually know the true identities of the people who got second-hand eyewitness testimony, right? And so later, what I hear, like, for instance, there's kind of a thing that I hear from some Christians is that, like, there's a thing in the Bible that tells us that there were 500 witnesses to Jesus's, being alive after he was supposedly crucified. And I was like, oh yeah, well, I mean, if there were 500 witnesses, like 500 witness accounts, that would be a really big deal. But there aren't 500 witness accounts. It's someone secondhand telling us that there were 500. Like, we don't have those 500 witness accounts. It's someone telling us that 500 people saw it, right? Which is a really big difference. And so, even Matthew, who's someone who's supposed to have at least some firsthand account, like, a quarter of his stuff is copied. Like, we find it in other Gospels that he copied from them. Which makes me think that even he did not have a firsthand account of the events. So, obviously, the earliest biblical texts, we have, like, access to are in Greek, right? Well, Jesus spoke Aramaic, and so there's this really big problem, which is that if the earliest texts we have are already translated from the original language we spoke, and we don't have any texts in Aramaic, we don't know how accurate, we have nothing to compare it to, right? They've already been translated once by the time we're reading the earliest stuff, and already, we have someone in the early church complaining. This is a direct quote, by the way. The Christian believers, like the persons who fit of drunkenness lay violent hands upon themselves, have corrupted the gospel from its original integrity to a threefold, fourfold, and manyfold degree, and have remodeled it so that they might be able to answer objections. And that's from 170 CE, dude. That's not even like 3rd century. Already an early church leader is basically saying all of the Gospels are so corrupt and have been copied so many times incorrectly that it's not even distinguished. This is a church leader. This isn't like an atheist or a skeptic. This is a church leader, right? And so, here's another quote from another church leader later, is the differences among these manuscripts have become great, either through the negligence of some copyists or through the perverse audacity of others. They either neglect to check over what they have transcribed, or in the process of checking, they lengthen or shorten as they please. So that's another one. Another quote of a guy, this is 250 CE, where he's just basically telling us that it's just a huge, long game of telephone, right? And another one, this one sticks out to me because it's like intent, right? Another quote: write down not what they write down not what they find, but what they think is what they personally think the meaning is. And while they attempt to rectify the errors of others, they merely expose their own. And that's Jeremy. He's 398 CE, I think. And you have to consider that the modern Bible with all of the current revelations was only the one we have was only actually organized 360 years after Jesus died, right? Before that, everybody was arguing, which way about Holy Scriptures. And there's so many non-canonical ones that are deemed not canon, right? But until 360 years after his death, everyone disagreed on that, right? And so, here's the thing is, here's a quote, and for the life of me, I can't place it. I can't remember, but it was something along the lines of, there are more meaning, not translation errors that are whatever, right? Not spelling mistakes, not certain words, right? There are more meaningful copy, like changes from the earliest manuscripts we have to the Bible we have today, more changes than the actual words in the New Testament itself. Let me repeat that again. There are more changes in the Bible than words in the Bible. And which baffles me, because people are like, there are no contradictions. Well, there are contradictions, but people defend the shit out of those contradictions and try and make them make sense. You know, do that as you please, but I mean, what are we even reading? Like, at this point, like, I don't, like, anyway, it's mostly my rant, you know. I'll put it this way. If you watch this video and you're a Christian or you're religious and, you know, whatever, and you don't agree with anything I'm saying, I would say go and do some research. And I'm not telling you, like, that you're dumb to go do some research. I mean, like, most of the world is Christian, you know? This isn't like you're dumb for believing this. What I am saying is, like, go research it. Not, like, don't ask a pastor about it. Like, go online, go read sources, go read the biblical scholars talking about it, and read it without, like, don't defend your belief before you read what you need to read, right? Just take the evidence from it. And I would say, you know, after that, you know, or even before it, ask yourself, like, why you believe what you believe. Because Christianity is very fulfilling to people. Like, it gives meaning to people's lives. So do other religions, you know. All religions claim that, you know, they have the perfect solution to your life problems, and they can. But that doesn't mean that the contents of the religion are true. And so, yeah, you know, if you are, and I'm sure I got plenty of things wrong in this video, but if 1/10 of what I'm saying is accurate, that basically undermines the entire validity of the Bible. Right? It's like its actual historical accuracy. And I'm not to say that these texts aren't valuable. In reading the Bible myself, I mean, I've found so many things that are applicable to my own life. And even if they aren't, like, even if they're just like translation errors or copyists that put their own thing in, it doesn't take away from the fact that there's a lot of wisdom in it. And everyone should read the Bible, I think. And kind of pick and choose what resonates with you like you would any other text. But don't be fooled for a moment that it's historically accurate, or that, you know, the people make these really confident, bold claims that, you know, there's no contradictions, it's the Word of God, and, you know, it is completely historically accurate, and there's more evidence for that than there is for anything else ever. And if you don't believe it, you're stupid. It's completely unfounded objectively. And I don't want to say that and piss people off. Like, that inherently will offend a lot of people. And that's not my intention. I just think it's really important to do the research on your own religion. So yeah, go look up some of the things I talked about. You know, see how much of what I'm saying is true. From all of the, you know, from the quotes of the early church leaders, which I think I quoted somewhat right, to the actual history and timeline of the work. Like, you can't give special permission to this book. If you were to have any other thing in that historical context, like, you can't give this particular piece, this particular book, special permission to be wrong, to be right, even though its evidence is more poor than anything else. Like, that's what faith is supposed to be, but I think faith isn't really a virtue. I think it's like, it's ignorance. It's willful ignorance because you feel comfortable. And because, you know, it gives meaning. But, you know, if your meaning isn't really based on anything that's really true, then, you know, I mean, that's up to you, man. And I'd say, what else would I say? I would say that, don't defend what you believe to just defend it. Like, always be open to change. Because, like, in order to learn, you need to be open to being wrong. And if you already have a preset belief that you have no wiggle room in, because you're told that if you have wiggle room in that belief that, you know, you're going to be punished for it, you know, it's a manipulation tactic, man. If you heard that from anyone else in any other context, it would be a pretty bad sign. So yeah, anyway, that's pretty much my whole spiel, you know. I mean, this is a pretty messy video. It's just me, you know, from memory, just kind of blabbering on. But this religion dictates millions and millions and maybe even billions of people's lives. And even if it does do good things, it's entirely likely that it's the biggest game of historical telephone ever. You know, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal to me.